Hello there everyone, welcome to the channel if you're new, welcome back if you aren't, I'm EDJ, and now we are starting a new series that I'm planning on binge watching. There are 7 parts to this. We are watching Kings and Generals telling of the 100 Years War. There are 7 parts, and I'm planning on just binge watching them all in like one day right now. And yeah, I'm just really looking forward to this, guys. I have a good few hours ahead of me, even longer now because I'm going to be pausing to talk and give my thoughts on certain things. So we should just get right into it. Let's watch the first part, at least according to this playlist that I'm watching, which is the Battle of Let's just watch this. 'Crecy?
1453 marks a conclusion to the age of medieval Europe and the beginning of the early modern age, characterized by the feudal system's decline, increased economic prosperity, and more centralized government. It was famously the year which saw Constantinople's final fall, but that wasn't the only earth-shaking event taking place in 1453. On the other side of Europe, a victorious French army marched into the city of Bordeaux and seized it, ending the final chapter in a century-long conflict between England and France, the 100 Years' War. How did this generations-long war begin? What were its famous figures, great battles and impacts on the world? Welcome to the Kings and Generals series on the 100 Years' War, beginning with the Battle of Crecy in 1346. 2021 is just starting and we've decided to spend. When William, Duke of Normandy, conquered England in 1066, his status as a vassal of France's Capetian kings gave rise to a paradoxical situation in Western Europe. The monarchs of England now held ancestral territories on the continent as a vassal of the French kings, while also being rulers of a strong realm. Sometimes they controlled even larger territories in France than their overlords, a trend which reached its zenith between 1154 and 1204, when the Angevins ruled more than half of the country. This didn't last for too long, however, as a succession of strong French kings, beginning with Philippe II Augustus, gradually conquered more territory, and by 1224, all English possessions on the continent, save for Gascony in the southwest. This narrow
I'm really
strip
liking that we're about to see a new front of the British and French, rivalry. Because, mainly what we've covered in regards to that has just been through the Napoleonic era, and we know, Britain's constant antagonism of Napoleon. But it's gonna be interesting to just see, because, Britain and France had a lot of issues and a lot of battles, so I'm really looking forward to just kind of seeing more about this. I've heard of the 100 Years' War, though I obviously haven't gone fully in depth into it. And obviously I know about William the Conqueror. I took a history of English class because I'm an English major. And he came up because we were kind of studying the development of the English language, the evolution of it, and William's conquest of England definitely had a huge impact on the language and the words, and basically ending he started the Normandy line of kings. I believe he ended the original Anglo-Saxon with Harold by defeating him at Hastings, the Battle of Hastings. Wait, I need to double check. Yeah, Hastings. I'm just double checking. Like I said, even when I get things right, I still get nervous that I'm getting something wrong. But yeah, so obviously this whole situation and the fallout of it is just super interesting, and I'm just looking forward to just seeing this series. This is a very interesting time. And look, there's the false Roman Empire here. It's not even an empire. It's not even Roman or holy.
of maritime territory had grown prosperous under English rule and developed into an important source of royal income through the wine trade, often raising more in annual revenue than England itself. Gascony's population valued the connection it had with the island monarchy, and were not French as we know the French in our time. The duchy's language in the Middle Ages was a separate Gascon tongue, and its people had little to no ties with the people of northern France or its Capetian monarchy. Contemporary author Jean Froissart goes so far as to call the inhabitants the English. In 1259, King Henry III was forced to sign the Treaty of Paris, in which he renounced his claims on most continental lands, but was confirmed in his status as overlord of Gascony, but only as a vassal of the French kings, to whom he was obliged to pay homage. This is widely thought to be one of the factors which made the 100 Years' War inevitable. Despite the peace, a number of dynastic and territorial wars over the next half-century ratcheted up the tension between England and France even more, giving both sides experience in raising armies and waging war. This state of affairs probably would have continued for a long time, but on January 31st, 1328, Charles IV, the last king of the main branch of the Capetian dynasty, died without a male heir and left his kingdom in a dynastic crisis. Despite the fact that the English king, Edward III Plantagenet, was a nephew of the dead king, the French lords decided that his cousin, Philippe of Valois, which was the cadet branch of the Capetian dynasty, would inherit the throne. To justify it, they cited the ancient Salic law which prevented women from inheriting any land, a ruling which affected Edward because he was related to Charles IV through his mother Isabella. Edward at the time was young, and England was under the control of Isabella and her lover Roger Mortimer, so in 1329 he paid homage to Philippe VI. A year later, the now majority-age Edward and his supporters slew the despised Roger Mortimer and exiled Isabella to Norfolk, which allowed him to assume control of his kingdom. The newly minted English king marched north in 1333 and crushed France's Scottish allies at Halidon Hill, leaving David II to seek refuge in Paris at his allies' invitation, who then announced that any future talks must take Scotland's interests into account. Edward was not amused, and thereafter considered the French king, his nominal overlord, an adversary.
Wix gives you the power of AI to build the website you need. With full...
Dang. Yeah, they really didn't want Edward to get power in France, and it's continuing now with this whole issue with David. Dang, you're just kind of seeing the tensions rise now, huh?
This is probably what led England's king to grant the fugitive French count Robert d'Artois refuge in 1336. He had been found guilty of poisoning his aunt in a dispute over the inheritance of the eponymous county of Artois, condemned to death and then chased out of France. Robert arrived in London and was warmly welcomed by Edward III, who granted him an earldom, a few castles and stipends, despite the fact that Philip VI had declared himself a foe of any who harboured the criminal. When Philippe sent a demand to Edward through the Seneschal of Aquitaine, ordering his vassal to surrender Artois, the demand was rejected and both parties began preparations for war. Since Robert was actually in England, where Philippe VI technically had no jurisdiction over Edward, rather than in French territory, the order was viewed to have no legal legitimacy, which further displayed the king-vassal paradox created by the Norman conquest of England. All of these tensions came to a head on May 24, 1337. On that day, Philippe declared that Aquitaine no longer belonged to Edward because of the many excesses, rebellious and disobedient acts committed by the King of England and against us and our Royal Majesty, in particular citing his granting of haven to Robert Artois. The king then called his feudal lords to summon to war, the so-called arrière-bans, and this is widely seen as the beginning of the 100 Years' War, despite the lack of actual declaration. Instead, it was the culmination of many growing tensions, such as the gradual centralization of government, the unworkable nature of the Plantagenets' vassal status, and other factors. The conflict began on two fronts almost immediately, as the French began raiding an under-garrisoned Gascony. While that was happening in the south, a cash-strapped Edward III crossed the Channel into Flanders, England's closest commercial partner through the lucrative wool trade, and purchased the Holy Roman Emperor Ludwig IV's allegiance, but didn't gain too much benefit from the expense. Even after being forced to sell the Royal Crown of England off for funds, Edward launched a campaign into France with around 12,000.
Dang. Yeah, that's kind of the thing, huh, with war. It's always the need for money, huh? And yeah, I've heard before that I don't think this is the first instance of a king of England selling the royal crown for money. It really does go to show you the seriousness of the situation, though, I think. And he just said Ludwig's probably not gonna be of that much use. He essentially bought that. So yeah, now this is going on, and yeah, I really like the way he explained essentially the growing tensions. There were several instances of why this war is starting, and yeah, it's just this odd relationship between England and France and the vassal and whatnot. It is weird, and I imagine that's just gonna be completely broken now, right? And yeah, like I said, this is an area in history that I'm not very familiar with, so I'm not speaking much about. I wish I could add more to it, though I will say, like, yeah, it seems like the French win, at least that's what he said in the beginning, like it ends with a French taking something, so it seems like the French will come out on top. Though I'm interested in seeing the long-lasting ramifications at the end that help shape the future of Europe as we've come to know it, you know?
Troops, and eventually faced off against Philippe and his army, who outnumbered him 2-1 at Flamangerie in October. After a tense standoff, Edward retreated back into friendly territory and Philippe didn't pursue him. Though it was brief, the 1339 campaign was nightmarish for the local populations in Edward's wake. Medieval military strategy was to inflict as much carnage against hostile cities and agriculture as possible, which would weaken the enemy government, economy, and ultimately hamstring its ability to wage war. The English king had seen the effectiveness of such tactics, especially in rich and densely populated lands such as those in northern France, and so the notorious chevauchée was born. While not yet fully developed, these chevauchées were low-cost raids, using limited resources, with the deliberate aim of systematically devastating and lowering the productivity of territories through which the raiders marched, all the while enriching the invader and weakening the allegiance between the conquered and their king.
That is a nightmare for the ordinary person, right? that's brutal. It goes to show you, but yeah, for the ordinary person, you're just minding your own business, and then you're just like being raided. Oh, dude, that sucks. But I get it. Like, destroy the enemy. Essentially, it is a battle of economy, right? Like in a sense, like, hey, if you can cripple the enemy's economy, low war effort. Like, I get that, but I kind of like, yo, just the ordinary people minding their own business. Like, that sucks for them, you know? But again, different time, very brutal in the past, we know this. But yeah, that just sucks. Oh gosh darn it.
As the 100 Years' War progressed, the utility of this strategy was to prove itself indisposable. By the time 1340 began though, Edward's campaign had left the king even more monetarily destitute than ever, but this didn't stop him from formally proclaiming himself King of England and France in Ghent during January of that year. The situation in the Channel wasn't going in Edward's favour. Ever since 1336, English coastal towns had continuously fallen victim to seaborne raids from French attacks. While the Plantagenet king's own captains often managed to retaliate with equal rapacity, Philippe VI had the larger navy, and there was a real possibility of England being invaded. Edward III therefore returned to England 2 months after his coronation in Flanders. The fact that he owed money to prominent creditors in the area also provided adequate reason to get off the continent. After making landfall, the king raised a new tax and immediately began assembling new forces for the war. Reinforcements and ships, mainly 150 or so converted merchant vessels known as cogs, were assembled at Orwell in Suffolk, ready for the attack. When all was prepared, Edward announced against the advice of his many close officials that he was going to attack France's 200-vessel-strong armada, which was anchored in modern-day Belgium, and destroy it. In defiance of those members of his entourage who decried the apparently foolhardy naval assault, Edward III proclaimed that, "I shall cross the sea, and those who are afraid may stay at home." He set sail on June 22nd.
He's like, save you want, cowards, I'm going. But, that is a very ballsy move, I must say. And I'm wondering if it's gonna work out or not. Yeah, it seems like the biggest issue right now is Edward's economy and money problem. He needs to solve that money problem quickly if he's gonna have a costly war, right?
1340. 2 days later, Edward's fleet managed to trap Philippe's ships at the port of Sluis, using favourable conditions and a hail of withering arrow fire from longbows to gain control of the battle. It was a decisive and surprising English victory. 10 to 20,000 French were killed, and it is said that only Philip VI's jester dared to inform him of the disaster.
Dang, okay, that was cool. Essentially trapping them and just bombarding them. Overall, that's risky but bold plan that paid off. Like, great job.
However, Edward was undermined by resistance against his tax collection at home, and this forced him to go back to England. At this point, the 100 Years' War transformed into a proxy war when Duke John III of Brittany died in spring of 1341, igniting a succession crisis between his half-brother John of Montfort and niece Jeanne of Blois. This drew in the larger surrounding powers. England, the duchy's merchants and its peasantry largely supported the former, while France and the higher nobility sided with the latter. As well as opening up another front against Philippe VI, Edward's geopolitical interests were served by getting involved as well. English trade, reinforcement and communication routes by sea to Aquitaine went around the coast of Brittany, and a hostile ruler in the duchy might sever those vital connections. The war was initially going France's way, until Edward sailed to Brittany with a small navy in 1342, and launched a blistering chevauchée through the enemy lands, before besieging Rennes, Nantes and Vannes. After a few months campaigning, however, papal envoys negotiated a 3-year truce, and the English king returned to his kingdom in January 1343. Pope Clement VI tried to end hostilities by mediating a peace conference at Avignon the year after, but neither side would agree to the terms put forward by the other, and the war continued unabated.
That is very interesting. This has already taken turns I did not see coming. Like he mentioned, turning into a proxy war. and so on and so forth. And that was a bit interesting to see the Pope's involvement, wanting there to be peace. Yeah, I don't know what to expect with this, but I feel like we're in for a lot of twists and turns, which I'm actually looking very forward to. I love when I don't know what the heck's going on, because it allows me to be like, wait, what? Like, it's kind of like watching a show in a sense,
1345 saw the first major English military venture into Gascony, with several thousand men under the Earl of Derby retaking Bergerac and then defeating a French counterattack in October. This action gave Edward time to plan and amass his forces in England. He sailed from Porchester in July of 1346 and landed at the Norman town of La Hogue with a large army, much to the surprise of the local population. This new theatre of war in Normandy was virgin land heretofore untouched by the conflict, and because of that, its devastation would massively affect any taxation that the Valois king hoped to extract from it. In addition, the destruction would diminish Philippe's prestige and hopefully goad him into an ill-considered battle. Whether Edward actually planned to campaign in Normandy is a matter of debate though, with some historians even claiming that the plan was to campaign in Gascony, but was thwarted by unfavourable winds. Whatever the case, the English army rested for the night, then set off at dawn, launching a blistering chevauchée throughout the Cotentin Peninsula. Normandy's rich countryside was intentionally ruined. Mills, barns and orchards were burned, while barrels of wine were smashed or stolen. Nothing was to be left for the French. Edward III reached Caen on July 26th, but despite accepting the garrison's surrender, his army raped, plundered, torched and killed without quarter. When the 3-day sack was complete, 3,000 townspeople were dead, and the king began sending barges filled with looted riches back to his kingdom. As a wave of terrified refugees fled before him, the English king marched inland towards Paris. At the same time, Philippe VI had received word of the landing and was massing a large army near Saint-Denis. However, it wasn't ready for battle yet, and therefore couldn't intervene as Edward reached Poissy, from where he sent raiding parties out to burn Saint-Cloud and Saint-Germain within some—
I'm gonna say that Edward seems to have been Edward has seemed to be taking the initiative so far in this video. He's been the guy jumping, basically, helping aid with the hostilities, jumping, attacking the fleet, aiding in the proxy war. Like, he's just going for it. He seems like he's taking more of the initiative, aggressive approach, and Philippe, I'm sure he hasn't been idle, but like Kings and Generals isn't going too deep into what he's doing. It seems like he's more of the passive one. Again, just from this video. But yeah, Edward just seems to be taking the control of the entire theater, and Philip, I'm just calling him Philip. Philip is like on the back pedal, basically on the ropes, if you would. And yeah, this was just a great maneuver, attacking this, something I don't think anyone expected to be attacked, Normandy, the virgin soil, and yeah, just really hampering the economy, ruining the prestige of Philip. Like, overall, yeah, Edward's just taking the initiative, And Philip, you need a counter, dude. Like, you need to do something. Like, you're coming across way too on the back foot in this video. Yeah.
Sight of Paris's very walls. The English had shown Philippe's subjects that he couldn't protect them, and began marching north again. But now the French army began chasing them, and only narrowly missed an opportunity to pin Edward on the Somme's south bank. After he managed to cross, the now campaign-hardened army of England encamped in the forest of Crecy on August 26, 1346. Though Edward had managed to evade Philippe's larger army so far, the Valois monarch's vanguard was getting unnervingly close, so his Plantagenet foe prepared to turn and fight. After a brief reconnaissance, a plan was devised. As Philippe's host, the flower of medieval Europe slowly got closer. Edward drew up his now reduced forces on an elevated ridge between Crecy and Wedicourt, which looked south into a valley, daring the French to try and knock him off it. Exact figures for army size are impossible to calculate, but Edward's was probably just over 14,000 strong, made up of 2,500 chainmail-clad men-at-arms and dismounted knights, 2,500 spearmen, and 3,250 light cavalry, known as hobilars. A further 7,000 were England's lethal archery corps, armed with longbows and armour-piercing bodkin arrows. Since the reign of Edward I, every English village had been tasked with contributing men to the National Reserve of Archers precisely for this kind of battle, and were legally obliged to train in the longbow's use each week. This force was divided into 3 groups. 2 were in front on the left and right. The former was commanded by Earls Arundel and Northampton, while they followed Edward III's son, the 16-year-old Black Prince, into battle. The King's division remained in the rear as a strategic reserve. All 3 had infantry in the centre and longbowmen on the flanks, while fronted by a series of pits, trenches and stakes to serve as a defence. Edward went in among his men, inspiring and encouraging them, so that men who were inclined to cowardice became brave, whilst also warning them not to plunder until he gave permission, as doing so would endanger the army. Morale and discipline taken care of, the king allowed his troops to break ranks so they could sit, eat and replenish their strength before battle was joined. The king himself took up command of the field on an elevated windmill near his reserve division. Philippe's strung-out French army began its approach by late afternoon, consisting of just over 30,000 troops, 12,000 mounted knights, 12,000 infantry, and 6,000 crossbowmen. Since the sun was about to set, and the army was exhausted from the day's march, Francis Valois King intended to heed the counsel of his outriders to encamp for the night and attack at dawn, when the soldiers would be better rested and prepared. However, a combination of chivalric pride and Philippe's lack of control created a situation where he had to attack. It was close to 6 PM by the time Valois contingents began their assault.
Okay, so from what I got from that saying is that essentially Philip wanted to wait because obviously, you know, it's getting dark and his army's tired, but apparently they forced his hand, like I guess the troops, like, yeah, I think that kind of goes to show the difference. Philip has lost control to a sense, while Edward has the control, and I think that kind of shows a difference. And I'm going to guess that the British might prevail due to that, being better rested, better disciplined, more unified, and having an advantageous defensive position. Though anything can happen. Let's find out.
First to advance up the ridge were the Genoese and French crossbowmen, who lacked their protective Pavese shields. As they went forward, a short but incredibly intense thunderstorm soaked the battlefield, damaging the crossbows and rendering them useless. In contrast, the unhindered English longbowmen stepped forward and let loose a storm of arrows, slaying a great number of their French counterparts and setting the rest to flight. Witnessing what they had saw as detestable cowardice from their fleeing skirmishers, the Count of Alençon bellowed, "Ride down this rabble who block our advance," at which point the first contingent of knights charged forward and unceremoniously cut down their own infantry.
What the Oh my goodness! Yo, he mentioned like the chivalry forced them into a battle that the king kind of wanted to wait till morning. But apparently it was like, that's insane. Like, coward. Like, what? Would you prefer that they all had died? Like, I've never seen that before. All the videos we've seen, I've never seen when a group dies is usually the commander trying to make them, like, stay. I've never seen just friendly killed. That's insane. You have an enemy right here. Oh my gosh.
This pointless exertion bogged down the knightly advance and left it struggling at the base of the ridge. At this range, the longbowmen loosed with deadly precision, slaying the French and panicking their horses, the latter helped by 3 organ guns which made a clamour of noise. Though some of the heavily armoured warriors managed to reach the English line, they were hacked to pieces by Edward's dismounted knights. The first charge had been a complete disaster, but the day was not yet over.
Yeah, that was a complete disaster. That was like, I'm shocked they killed their own people right there. And yeah, it just, first of all, the longbow's OP. The ridge, just, dang, everything's going well. Like, Philip, you need to get your act together, dude. You need to get some control and some discipline over your people, bro.
Undaunted by the initial failure, France's mounted knights continued to mount charges on the English line, putting particular pressure on the English right flank, where the young Black Prince was almost killed. Almost surrounded by the superior numbers of his enemy, the Black Prince sent for help from his father, who refused and famously stated, "Let the boy win his spurs, for I want him, please God, to have all the glory." After a while, however, the king did send 20 hand-picked knights to assist his son, who found that the Black Prince's contingent had already managed to repulse the charge and were now recovering before the enemy returned. In a subsequent attack, the blind King of Bohemia, John, ordered his knights to tie their horses to his own and led their liege into battle. This charge began well, managing to get past.
Yo, that's pretty metal. The dude's blind and he's leading a charge. Dude, that's awesome. Like, just a blind person leading any battle is amazing, but like a cavalry charge? Dang, that's pretty awesome. That's pretty great. And he's even creating some issue, it seems, so yeah, great job.
The archers, but they were then all cut down by the English infantry. The French unsuccessfully charged 15 times in all, each becoming more disorganized and hopeless than the last. As the battle progressed, even Philippe VI himself joined the fighting. He was injured by an arrow and had more than one horse killed under him before the battle finally calmed. Witnessing the disaster that was unfolding, one of the Valois king's vassals persuaded him to withdraw. He did so reluctantly, fleeing with what was left of his army to a nearby royal chateau and then all the way to Amiens. In the dark, the English slept on their ridge, not realizing just how much of a terrible toll they had inflicted on the French. They had lost less than 100 men, while Philippe had lost over 10,000.
Oh my gosh. Holy crap. That is a slaughter. Dude. Yo, Philip, you got humiliated, dude. Like, dang, the British owned them right there.
Including 1,500 lords and knights. While Edward III's tired troops were in no position to chase Philippe, he had gained a great victory and wanted to exploit it, marching to the port of Calais after his army rested and putting it to siege. As the town slowly starved, further good news came that a Scottish invasion prompted by France had been crushed at Neville's Cross near Durham. Calais fell on August 3rd, 1347. It would remain in English hands until 1558. Our series on the 100 Years' War will continue in the coming weeks.
And I'm gonna jump to the next part right now. Dude, that was Yo, that was amazing. Like everything was just went well for the British, and it goes to show you, yeah, the importance of like a great place of battle, like the geography, the longbows, just yeah, the French were just let's just charge. Like that's all they kept doing, charging, and that's it. So yeah, and that was just a great first part, and I'm like gonna watch all of them right now in like order. So I'm gonna jump to part two. I'll see you all then. Bye everyone.